This is part 2 of 2 of a video series dealing with creating and using swing components in Java applications and projects. Let's take a look at our next swing component, which is the JTextField. JTextField objects are single-line input and output boxes that can be placed on JFrame and JAPPLET forms, dialogues, and graphical interfaces to retrieve input from the user or gather fields of data. Some useful methods for JTextField objects are setText, which sets the text of the JTextField, getText, which will retrieve the text of a JTextField, requestFocus, which causes the cursor to focus on a JTextField, and selectAll, which selects all the text in a JTextField. Here's an example in code of using a JTextField, and I'm simply extending JAPPLET. I'm implementing Actionlistener, the same 3 imports you normally use: swing, abstract Windows toolkit, and AWT event. I'm adding a JLabel. Here's my JTextField that I'm adding, and I have a JButton and another JLabel for status. Get the content pane, add Actionlistener to the JButton BAnswer. I'm adding the label in this case. I'm adding the JTextField. I'm adding the JButton, and I'm adding the last label for status. And then in the ActionPerformed event handler, when I click the JButton, I'm going to get the source, and if it happens to be the button answer, the answer button, then I'm going to get the text from the JTextField. Okay, so I just get it. I'm going to store it inside this string here, name, and then I'm going to display hello there, and then whatever they typed into the JTextField. So to run it, see what it looks like, I'll run it, and it asks me, who are you? And I'll type in Charles, and I'll click answer, and it says, hello there, Charles. So you can see how it works. Here are some game graphical interfaces I built with, in this example, a JApplet and a JFrame. And just using a JTextField, I need this JTextField because I need to take input. I couldn't do that on my JLabels, right? I couldn't take input using them. So I need a JTextField here. I'm using that for input. I click start. And let me go over here and I'll just turn the music off so it's not so distracting. And in this case, I'm going to click go to continue. What type of fighter? And I also have key listener added to this. So if I hit the enter key, when this text file has focus, key listener will also listen for key presses as well. But either way, let's say that I just want to be a destroyer. I can type the whole thing out or just D. Click go, and notice it takes the input. It takes my choice, and I'll type in my name there. Alright, and then there's all my stats there, so it takes input that way. Here's another project called Mutant Wars, and it extends the JApplet, so I'm going to play it embedded in a web page. And again, I'm using a JTextField to get input. I need to get the input from the user, so let me maximize this window here. And embedded in the web page, we'll start the game.
Please enter a name for your character in the input field above. Click the Go button to continue. That is an admirable and honorable name. Welcome to Mutant Wars. Click Go to continue.
Let me go ahead and turn the narration off here real quick. Alright, so I'm going to click Go. Choose my character sex, but again, all of my input here, I have to call the function getText to get it, and then I process it, and that allows the player to choose how to create their character, what gender they want to be, their name, and so forth. Also, I'm using the method requestFocus, and that causes the cursor to blink inside the text field, puts the focus on the text field. I've also overridden this with key listener, so that not only can I click the go button and click the nav buttons, but I can also hit the enter key or just simply use the arrow keys to walk around the game. And again, all of that depends on this component here, this JTextField having focus. Then it starts the game, and again, as long as the cursor is blinking in the text field and it has focus, I can use key listener as well. So I'm showing you here, I'm not using the mouse, I'm using key listener and just hitting the enter key. So I start out, and now I'm going to navigate around the game. Just go from location to location, and it just builds up a map as I go. Turn off the music there. That'd be a little bit distracting. Okay, so you can kind of get an idea, and then if I go down here, let me see. I had a cheat, but I did this as a tutorial in 2007. I can't remember. What was it? I think it was page. Let's see. Let me go downstairs. And I think I need to access the data terminal. I have to go back and read the source code and figure out what I did. Cheat activated. There we go. Alright, let me go back upstairs. And that'll just, kind of give you an idea. But again, all of that takes place with this JTextField here, which I need for input. I couldn't do that with my JLabels here. I require, or I need a JTextField to get input or receive input from the player. And again, to see how easy it is to add a JTextField using the graphical form design tool inside of NetBeans, I would simply select text field under swing controls for a JTextField, and I could drag it and drop it. And I could set the text properties and background, foreground, all kinds of things just using the properties sheet. And again, NetBeans is going to write the code for you when you do that. The object, and as far as customizing the object and things like that. The next swing component we'll examine is the JPasswordField. JPasswordField objects are single-line input boxes that mask the characters you type into them. They can be placed on JFrame and JAPPLET forms, dialogues, and graphical interfaces to retrieve input from the user or gather fields of data. Some useful methods for JPasswordField objects are getPassword, which retrieves the password as a character array, which you can then convert to a string. getText, which retrieves the password as a string, although this method has been deprecated and one should use getPassword instead. And then of course requestFocus, which causes the cursor to focus on the password field. Here's an example in code, and we're importing the same three packages we did before. We're extending a JApplet as we did before, and we're implementing the event handling interface Actionlistener. However, instead of a JTextField, this time we have a JPasswordField. Now we're going to add all these items to the JApplet after we get the content pane, and we add Actionlistener, so it's based on when we click our JButton. But when we click our JButton, notice that instead of calling getText as we did with our JTextField, this time we have to call getPassword. And notice that the return value is not stored inside of a string, but it has to be stored inside of an array of type character. We then take that array of type character, and we can build a new temporary string, passing it into the constructor, and in that way convert it to a string. Once we do that, we can then display it. And just to see what this looks like, I'll show you. If I run the project, what's the password? And I'm going to type, what am I going to type? Alright, then the characters are masked. You can't see what they are. I'm going to click enter, and then your password as a string, in this case Zelda. And in the NetBeans GUI Form Designer, under Swing Controls, if I come here and select Password Field, I can simply drag it and drop it onto my form. How easy is that? The next Swing component we'll examine is the JTextArea. A JTextArea component is sort of like a JTextField or a JLabel, but it can handle more than one line of output. JTextArea objects are multi-line input and output boxes. They can be placed on JFrame and JApplet forms, dialogues, graphical interfaces, and can retrieve input from the user or gather fields of data. Some useful methods for JTextArea objects are setText, which sets the text of a JTextArea, getText, which retrieves text from the JTextArea, and setLineWrap, which causes text to wrap to the next line in a JTextArea. JTextArea objects are often used with JScrollPanes. This brings us to the next swing component, the JScrollPane. JScrollPanes and JTextAreas go together like peanut butter and jelly. JScrollPane objects can be added to JTextAreas and JList objects to give them horizontal or vertical scroll bars. Some useful methods for JScrollPane objects are setViewPortView, which selects the component to add the scroll pane to. SetHorizontal scrollbar policy, which controls whether or not the component has horizontal scroll bars, and setVertical scrollbar policy, which controls whether or not the component has vertical scroll bars. Some possible parameters for setScrollbar policies are scrollbarNever, which means never display a scrollbar, scrollbarAlways, which means always display a scrollbar, and asNeeded, which means only display the scrollbar if the text flows over the available visible area. Here's an example in code of a JTextArea without a JScrollPane. So by itself, we're simply importing the same three packages we normally import, extending a JApplet, and we're implementing the interface Actionlistener to handle the event. The event will be clicking the J button. Here we're adding two JTextAreas. One we'll use for input, another we'll use for output, just to show that you can use a JTextArea for both. And then we're going to get the content pane inside the init function and add components as we have in previous examples. In the ActionPerform method, we're simply going to call the function getText on our text area for input, and then we're going to display it in our text area for output. Again, to see what a text area looks like by itself without any scroll panes, let's run it. And you can see here Can't remember the Gettysburg Address, but whatever. Anyway, your message was 4 and 7 years ago our forefathers brought forth on this, yada yada yada. You can see that it was able to retrieve the text from this text area and display the text in this text area. Here's another example in code, but instead of doing it as we did in the previous example where we just had a JTextArea without a scroll pane, now we're going to implement our JTextAreas with scroll panes. So notice that our JTextArea for input will have a corresponding scroll pane as well. Notice our JTextArea for output will also have a corresponding scroll pane that goes with it. Also notice that after we get the content pane and assign it to a container object, we add the scroll pane object instead of adding the text area. We never had the text area, just a scroll pane, and the scroll pane will then add the text area. Contrast that to the previous example where, look, inside the init method, we're adding TA input directly to the background of the JApplet, and we're adding TA message directly to the background of the JApplet. Not so here. In this next example, instead, we're adding the scroll panes, not the text areas. What we do is we call the method setViewPortView, and then we pass in the text area. So when we add this to the JApplet background, it's going to turn around and add our text area. Also notice we're setting the horizontal and vertical scroll bar policies with our constants. In this case, we're never going to have a horizontal scroll bar, and we're always going to have a vertical scroll bar. We did that for the input text area, and we're going to do the same for the output text area. Again, we're adding the scroll pane instead of the text area, and then the scroll pane will turn around and add the text area by itself by calling the method setViewPort. And we're setting our horizontal and vertical scroll bar policies to be never and always as we did before. Now in the text area, we're going to turn on line wrap so that if text overflows, instead of having to add a scroll bar, in this case it'll just wrap it around to the next line. We're doing that for both text areas. And also we're going to put a border around, in this case, our text area for our message or output text area. Okay, we're adding Actionlistener to our JButton so we can listen for those events. And we're just adding the labels. And again, we're adding the scroll pane objects in this case rather than adding the text areas. And the event handler is pretty much the same. We're simply going to call getText from our text area, and we're going to display it in our output area. So let's run this and see how it's different. In this case, with the scroll panes, here is what it would look like. Behavior is just the same, but instead of two plain JText areas with no scroll panes, now we have scroll panes being displayed. And again, notice how if I add this in, I'll just hit the enter key. Notice how the scroll pane will then allow me to scroll up and down. And then I'm going to click enter. And then notice I can scroll here. My message was, and I just typed some text in there. So contrast that to the previous example, this without the JScrollPanes. You can see why normally when you add a JTextArea, you also always add a JScrollPane. As a matter of fact, NetBeans does that by default. Once again, we're in the NetBeans graphical form design tool for a JFrame or JApplet application. And in this example, I'm just going to select the text area under swing controls. So I'll drag and drop it onto my interface. When I do this, it adds it. And notice by default, it adds it as a child of a scroll pane. In other words, it automatically adds the scroll pane as a parent object. And in this case, the child object. If I were to come down here, notice that the accessible parent is the scroll pane. Okay? And notice that via the properties sheet, I can go and change my constants for the horizontal and vertical scroll bar policies. Always, never as needed, always, never as needed. And if I select the text area here, notice I can set its properties as well. In this case, line wrap, if I wanted to set line wrap. Our next swing component is the JSlider control. JSlider objects are graphical sliding controls. They can be placed on JFrame and JApplet forms, dialogs, and graphical interfaces to modify and adjust values. Some useful methods for JSlider objects are setValue, which sets the value and position of a JSlider control, and getValue, which will get the value and position of a JSlider control. Here's an example in code of a JSlider control. And in this case, I've added a JSlider control and built it. And once I do this, I'm going to use the method setValue to set its initial value to be 25, which is like 1/4 of the slider control. The minimum value is 0, the maximum value is 100. Once I do this, I'm going to add the JSlider control. In this case, I'm adding it to the JApplet background, setting the X and Y width and height with set bounds. And then I'm going to handle an event, in this case action performed, so it's going to be an action event when I click a J button. And when I do this, I'm going to call the method getValue to get whatever the value is of the slider control and temporarily store it in this integer, and then I'm just going to display it here. Okay, so let's see what that looks like if we run it. And the initial default is 25, and to confirm that, I'll click the charge button. Notice it says your current power level is 25. Now I'll go to the minimum, it's 0. I'll go to the maximum, I'll click charge, notice it's 100. And any value in between that I can simply call by simply calling the method getValue. So you can see how that works. Here's an example of a JSlider control used in a game interface, in this case on this JFrame to set the charge. And here in our graphical form design tool in NetBeans, I can simply select a slider under Swing Controls, then drag and drop it, and set its properties accordingly. The next Swing component we'll examine is the JProgressBar. JProgressBar objects provide a graphical means of presenting numerical or progress information. They can be placed on JFrame and JAPPLET forms, dialogues, and graphical interfaces to display values. Some useful methods for JProgressBar objects are setValue, which sets the value and position of a JProgressBar control, and getValue, which gets the value and position of a JProgressBar control. Here's an example in code of a JProgressBar. You'll notice it's very similar to the JSlider control. We're going to build the object as a global, and we're going to set its initial value to be 25. And then down here in Action Performed, we're simply going to get its value and display it. So again, if I run this to see what it looks like, here's our progress bar. You can see it's at 25%. If I hit the Enter button, the level's 25. Here's an example of a JProgressBar being used in a game, in this example to indicate health. It's easy to add a JProgressBar using the NetBeans GUI Form Design tool. In this case, under Swing Controls, I would simply select Progress Bar, drag and drop it, and then I could set the object's properties right here on the property sheet. Let's take a gander at another Swing component, the JPanel. JPanels provide a means of organizing Swing and AWT components into graphical panels on a graphical interface. One adds the components to the panels and then adds the panels to the JFrame or JAPPLET window. Some useful methods with JPanel are add, which adds a component to a JPanel or a JPanel to a window, and setBounds, which sets the position and size of a JPanel. Here's an example in code of using JPanels. We're importing the same packages we normally import, and for our graphical interface we're going to use a JAPPLET, so we're extending JAPPLET, and now we're going to implement the event handling interface Actionlistener. Now I have some globals and I've split them up into two categories, so hopefully this will be an easier to follow example. And the first category is my first JPanel, which is a defense panel. The next category is for my attack panel, my second JPanel. Each JPanel will have 2 JLabels, 3 JCheckBoxes, and a JButton added to it. So all those are set up and declared in globals. Then inside the init method, let's see what happens. I get the content pane and assign it to a new container object, set my layout to be null. When I do this, I'm going to draw borders around my status JLabels, in this case for both attack and defense, and they'll be black in color. Now I'm going to set up my defense panel, and notice that I'm not adding components here to the JAPPLET background. Instead, I'm adding components to the panel. And then later, once I do that, I'll add the panel to the JAPPLET background. Well, to set up the defense panel, first I'm going to draw a border around it so we can see where it begins and where it ends. And the color is going to be green. And then I'm going to add all my components. So my JLabels, my JCheckBoxes, and my JButton. Once I've done that, I'm done with the defense panel. Now I have to set up the attack panel. So I'm going to do the same thing, draw a border around it so I can see where it ends and begins. And this time I'm going to make the border color red. When I do this, I'm going to add my components, my JLabels, my checkboxes, and my JButton. Now with my 2 JPanels set up, I just need to add those JPanels to the background of my JApplet. I also have to add Actionlistener, so when I click the buttons, I can listen for and handle the events. In this case, my JButton fire and my JButton shields on each panel. Well, I just add those JPanels, in this case the attack panel and the defense panel, to my JApplet's background, and I set the X and Y position and the width and the height with setBounds. Once I do that in my ActionPerform method, I'm handling the event just as if everything was on all one JApplet or in one panel. I just need to get the source, and then once I get the source as an object, if it's the shield button, I'll do this based on which checkbox has been selected, and if it's the fire button, I'll do this based on which checkbox is selected. So let's see how this looks if we run it. And you can see here are my two JPanels, okay? So in this case, the attack console, the defense console, and then if I choose phasers, it's phasers. And if I choose, I don't know, cloaked, it's cloaked, ship cloaked. So you can see how that works. Adding JPanels with the NetBeans graphic form design tool is a cinch. In this case, under Swing Containers, I can simply select the component and drag and drop it onto the applet background. And then once I do that, I can add components to it. If I wanted to resize it a little bit, let's say I wanted to add a label to my panel, I can do so just like that. Convenient, huh? The last Swing component we're going to examine in this set of videos is the JMenuBar. Now there are many more Swing components, but remember we were trying to keep this brief. JMenuBars provide a means of creating menus and toolbars within a JFrame or JApplet application. JMenu items are added to JMenus, which are added to JMenuBars, which are ultimately added to a JFrame or JApplet window. Some useful methods with JMenuBars are setJMenuBar, which adds a JMenuBar to a JFrame or JApplet, setAccelerator, which adds shortcut keys to JMenu items, addActionListener, which of course adds an event handler to a JMenu item, and add, which adds JMenu items and JMenus to JMenuBars. Here's an example in code of using a JMenuBar. I'm using the same three imports we usually use, and I'm extending JApplet for the graphical interface. I have one JMenuBar, which will be the top-level menu item at the top of the JApplet. And I also have two JMenu items. In this case, these are the parent objects, or the very first category you'll see of the menus. And they are File and Info. And then I have four JMenu items. Two, Open and Close, will be added to the JMenu File, and two, About and Help, will be added to the JMenu Info. Now the action moves to the init method. Remember, the init method is called automatically when we load the JApplet. And in this example, I placed all the code for setting up and displaying the JMenuBar inside this function, setUpMenu. When we invoke setUpMenu, we first set up the main menu object, File. And then to that object, we're going to add the submenu items, in this case, File Open and File Close. And then once we do this, we're going to add it to our JMenuBar. We do the same thing for the next broad parent level category, in this case, the menu object Info. And once we do that, we're going to add the submenu items, or JMenu items, About and Help. And then we're going to add those to the JMenuBar. Now that we've added them to our JMenuBar, we need to set the properties, the shortcut keys, and the event handlers on all of our submenu items. In other words, we have to configure the JMenu item objects. So here we're setting the text property of our first submenu under the parent object, the File menu, to be open. We're setting the shortcut key as the combination of Alt and O in this case, and that's with the method setAccelerator. And then notice how we add ActionListener. A little bit different from how we've done it in other examples, but this time we're going to create a new ActionListener as a parameter on the fly. That goes in as a parameter argument, and then also a new event handler, ActionPerformed, and we're just going to fire off a JOptionPane and say open. And if you notice, we're doing the same thing all the way down for all of our JMenu items, or our submenus. The next submenu item under the File menu is Close. The same thing, we set the text property, we set the shortcut key, which is the combination of Alt and C, and then we also, in this case, instantiate a new ActionListener interface object, and then we have an event handler ActionPerformed, which fires off a JOptionPane Close. Once we do that, now we're going to also configure About and Help in the same way. We're going to set the shortcut key, the text, and add ActionListener, the shortcut key, the text, and add ActionListener, and they're just going to fire off JOptionPanes that say About and Help. But any code I wanted to put there, I could put there, or if I wanted to, I could simply map it up to another function somewhere in my class, and then call that method if I wanted to from right here inside of my nested parameterized ActionPerform function. Anyway, when we're all done setting up our JMenuBar, we're going to actually add our JMenuBar to our JApplet interface with the method setJMenuBar. What does that look like? Well, let's run it and see. Here's our JApplet, and you can see here are our two top-level parent file objects. Okay, so we added the JMenuBar, and then these are, in this case, the JMenus, and then underneath them are the JMenu items. And you can see the shortcut keys. And if we click them, notice that in this case, our event handler will respond accordingly. Okay. So you can kind of see how that works. Here's how you might use JMenuBars in your projects. In this case, here I have a hyperlink, which just opens a web page. Might use it for turning things on and off like narration or music or sound effects. Help, assistance or about, file, load, save, quit, things like that. That's one way to use the JMenuBar. And then again, here's another project, same thing, sound, functions, in this case using inventory, help, file, load, save, quit, that sort of thing. And then here's another example, in this case game functions, sound, maps, clues. In this case I could just launch a JFrame and display a map, web links, and so forth. Adding a JMenuBar to a project is very convenient using the NetBeans graphical form design tool. In my component palette, I'm just going to scroll down and select swing menus. I'm just going to drag and drop a menu bar item and place it on my JApplet form. And that adds a JMenuBar if you look here. Okay, and then I'm going to double click in Navigator pane here, the JMenuBar 1 object. This little square, I'm just going to drag it out and resize it a little bit so I can kind of see things. I have to hold the mouse over there. And you'll notice that by default, it will add 2 JMenu items when I add a JMenuBar. And that's because most projects usually have a file and edit. And notice that I could modify the properties here if I wanted to. I could rename it to something, or I could simply delete it if I didn't want that item. If I wanted to add new menu items, I could simply go over here and click menu and drag and drop. And notice I can set the properties. And let's say I was going to call that help. I'll add another menu, top level menu in this case, and we'll call that tools. Once I've done that, if I want to add a submenu, I simply select the JMenu item that's on my JMenuBar, and then I can add a JMenu item. So I'm going to come over here and click menu item. I'm going to drag and drop it right there on file. I'm going to come down here and in the text property, this will be open. And I'm going to select another menu item. I'm going to drag and drop it right here on file. I'm going to select it, and this will be close in this example. Okay, so that way I've just added 2 submenu items, open and close. And I could, go further here in this hierarchy or this tree. I could add, submenu items to another menu item to another submenu and so forth. But you can kind of see how that works. And I can go here and configure all the properties. And then let's say I want to trigger an event. This is really great in using the NetBeans graphical design tool, because I can simply right-click on a menu item just as if it were a JButton. Select events, action, action performed. And notice it writes the code here. Here's the event handler. And if I want to, I can just come in and let's say I'm going to fire off a JOptionPane. We'll just do show message dialog, null there. And we'll just say open. And a semicolon there. Okay. So let's see how this works. We'll launch our JApplet GUI form here. Now you can see there's our JMenuBar, and here's our submenus. And if I click on open, it triggers the event and fires off the event handler for open, giving us our JOptionPane.